Hi, my name is Roy Coughlan and welcome to the show. I've also got 5 podcasts: The Awakening Podcast, exposing fraud and corruption, but with solutions; the Crypto Podcast, talking about all things blockchain, NFTs, crypto; the Meditation Podcast, talking about all different types of meditation, but there's also meditations there from 1 minute to 2 hours. And the other one's the Learn Polish Podcast, so if you're interested in learning Polish, you can do that. And the other one is Speaking with Roy Coughlan, and I just have guests from around the world talking about either public speaking or also about their book or just general life in general. And you'll find everything on bio.link/podcaster. I'm also a podcasting coach, and you see the QR code there, and it's also on my link as well. And if you're interested in actually going on some podcast shows, I'm helping people doing that. Or if you're interested in sponsorship, you can contact me. And I'd like to thank my sponsor, DanielPacker.com. He helps people with anxiety, stress, and addictions. He's got a 90% success rate, and you only pay if you're successful. So be sure to check him out, DanielPacker.com. I hope you enjoyed this week's show.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Freedom International Livestream. We welcome you all the time, and we really hope that you could always get engaged with us, either by recommending guests for us, just liking, subscribing, or definitely sharing every episode, okay? And in your own beautiful world, I'm sure you could do a lot of things to help make some changes in this world. So today, we welcome James Roguski, who's is a researcher, author, natural health proponent, and an activist. And he believes that the old systems are rightfully crumbling, so we must build their replacements quickly. So in March 2022, James uncovered documents regarding proposed amendments to the international health regulations and was instrumental in raising awareness about them, which resulted in the amendments being rejected. So James is now doing everything possible to expose the WHO, the World Health Organization, hidden agenda behind their proposed pandemic treaty, as well as the WHO's ongoing attempts to amend the international health regulations. James' vision for the future can be summarized by the phrase out of the WHO and in with the new. So, welcome, James, and I am very happy that Dr. Carl Moore, who is also a podcaster and an author of The Nature's Twist, can help me really make this episode powerful and meaningful for everyone's time because its moment is very precious. So, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I look forward to an in-depth conversation, and thank you for allowing me to share all this information with your audience.
And let's begin right now with James' information that I place on the ticker, and I will place it also in the post notes because I know he makes himself available so that you could ask him questions directly or any conversation that is helpful for you. See, none of us really alone in this journey. We are all connected no matter where we are and no matter what time of the day. Okay, so it's right there. And
I realize
James,
that
at this,
the details
yeah,
in this are overwhelming, and they're changing all of the time. And so, I welcome people who have questions. I don't necessarily know everything, but I think I've dug into this enough that the vast majority of people's questions, I think I can help clarify them. And I've learned that when you try to do that with a text message or an email, oh, it's almost impossible. You need the conversation to get to the point where you realize that the communication has actually happened, and people go, oh yes, now I get it. And so I welcome that.
thank you, James. And yes, and even for myself, I made sure that I updated a lot of my information or contacts. So I will put it there and on my website, graceasagra.com or quantumnurse.life, so that, you know, doing the episode is not just like words going out in the air and not getting encrypted or embodied in to the viewers or audience, whatever resonates to you. We're not imposing any of our ideas or any our conversation, but we just want you to be informed, because in the information, then we gain knowledge and we gain also our wisdom. So today, we were going to unpack so many things about World Health Organization, because again, it kind of can be so boring, but sometimes that's, I think that that feeling of being bored is what makes those powers who continue to control us gain more power to control us, because we get bored in knowing things. But it is important with we really read, and in the words, they've been playing with words for us, right? So I remember that, in they always play with the word safe and effective, access, response, spread, risk, public, commitment. There's so many words: equitable, future, development, emergency, effective, and pandemic. And it's for the public. So these words does something to our heart. And if we don't connect our heart to our brain and to our entire being, then we're lost. We're all about, okay, about here and nothing here. Or if we're all about here and nothing here, no. So this conversation would like us to integrate everything that we need to know and all of our humanity. So I wanted to ask James that maybe, yeah, unpacked this for us, and why is it important for us to learn about what's going on with the whole what's happening now with the negotiation? Because in New Jersey, because that's where I am right now, we there was a link that we were really doing documents we were signing or sending, that we didn't want those things happening, but it's still happening, and we didn't really know. And somewhere down the line, the conversation just gonna water down. And is it all about the transfer of wealth? Because we know it's not about health. We know that, okay. And I'm a little ashamed that before the pandemic, I was wishing I could work for who. I did have that little desire. I looked into the website, and that was way before the pandemic. So, but I'm so glad that when it doesn't happen, because I there was something that stopped me from applying, and I'm glad I didn't. So, please lead us in this conversation.
Well, let me just say this about the boring nature of what's going on here. Um, this is such a soap opera. It's actually anything but boring. And I don't watch television. I don't have a television, and I haven't been connected to cable or anything like that for decades. But in the past, I have watched television shows, and what this is really like is if there had been a show on television for a couple of years and you just started watching it, right? There's this cast of characters. They each have their own motivation. They each have their own drive. You know, they're all good and bad. It's not just everyone at the WHO is evil and they're trying to take over the world. It's way more complicated than that. And if you view this from that perspective, you'll see that, yeah, there's periods of time that are boring and they're talking about stuff. But then you ask yourself, why are they saying that? Why are they using that language? Well, they have their own English language, and they use phrases that when a new person starts to listen and watch the show, when you start to read the documents, you start to watch their video presentations and all that sort of stuff, you, you hear what they're saying, but it's your dialect of English. And you don't realize that they're speaking a totally different language. And so you raised, the meaning of words. It's very, very important. They have so many phrases where they've taken common English words, and when they use those words, they don't mean what you interpret them to mean. And the best example I have of it is I have a very unusual tree in my front yard. A bougainvillea bush grew up into the tree. And so I have this vibrantly fuchsia large tree in my front yard. Well, you can't even begin to picture what it looks like in your mind. But if I say the word tree, you're going to think about whatever tree might be in your yard or your neighbor's yard or down the street, or a tree that you played in when you were a child. When they speak, you have to interpret their English into your English, and that doesn't come easy. Okay, and so the starting point is to realize that when they say words like, or when people say words like treaty, that engenders a certain thought in your mind. Well, they don't call it a treaty. It's a convention or agreement or other international instrument. And you go, well, does that matter? And so it really does matter, because a convention, in my personal opinion, has been used and is intended to be used for evil, because it's an agreement that puts a group of people in charge of working out the details later. And the best example of that is the Framework Convention for Climate Change, which the United Nations adopted back in 1992. If you wonder why all of these crazy things are being done by local governments, you know, city, county, state, and so forth, and nations all around the world, it's because in 1992, the nations patted themselves on the back and they said, oh, we've reached an agreement, this framework convention for climate change, and that's going to save the world from, whatever boogeyman they were making everybody be afraid of. And so they set up a conference of the parties. And the next one is going to be meeting at the end of November, beginning of December. And they make decisions, they set protocols, and we're obligated to do what they say, even though we don't have any say over what they decide. And that's what they're trying to do with the convention agreement for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. And so if you want to put a conference of the parties in place to make decisions with tens of billions of dollars to build out the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex going off into the future forever, then maybe you support what they're doing. But if you realize that they don't call it a treaty, it's a convention. And now they've changed it, they're calling it an agreement, right? But what they're seeking is to confuse everybody, to get them to sign a blank check, basically, agree to put somebody else in charge to work out all of the details off into the future. In my view, that's insane. No, the answer is no.
So, James, if I can ask, I know very little about this other than that the World Health Organization has got agreement or is in negotiations with 193 countries. When they declare a pandemic, all these countries have to do what the World Health Organization says, despite what their governments may.
Well, let me actually push back on
Please
that.
do, yeah.
Okay, because that is what many people have been saying. Okay, and this is going to be hard to parse out, because there are multiple different documents, and there are documents that were rejected last year in 2022. There are documents that were adopted last year in 2022. There were a large collection of proposed amendments that were first submitted in September of 2022, and more than a year ago. And those are currently still being negotiated, potentially to be adopted next year. And then there's this convention, which is yet another document. There's documents that the United Nations pretended to adopt in September. And so what has been happening across the board is all of the information from all of these different documents gets lumped into one. And so people say, oh, the treaty does this or the treaty does that. Well, number one, there is no damn treaty. Okay. Um, it's not a treaty, because a treaty implies you put words on paper, you agree to it, and you're done with it. Right. but a convention goes on and on and on forever. And so if I could give you the visual of pretending you were in a lecture class in high school or college, and there's a chalkboard, in front, or a whiteboard or whatever, and just take everything you think you know and erase it. Okay, because the misinformation and the confusion between, there have been at least 5 versions of the convention. There's all of these multiple documents with amendments, and really, I think it's helpful to start from square one. And so, what is it that they're actually doing? What is it that their purpose is? Well, you actually have to go back to the end of 2021. At the end, a couple of last days of November and the first day of December in 2021, the nations had called for a second session of the World Health Assembly. So the World Health Assembly, it's actually in the WHO, there's 194 member nations. In the UN, there's 193, and they're not, there's a couple that are, different. And there are also 2 states, the Vatican and Liechtenstein, who are also party to the international health regulations. So there's actually 196. Okay. And then they have 400 what they call relevant stakeholders, um, groups like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and so forth, who get to have a seat at the table with many of these negotiations. And the people are nowhere to be found. There has not been with the WHO the required public comment period that was decided upon. And so, going back to this session of the World Health Assembly at the end of 2021, the 194 nations got together and they said, well, the way the vaccines were rolled out in 2021 was inequitable. And by that, what they're talking about is the wealthy nations bought up contracts for 10 times what they needed, and the relatively poor nations didn't feel like they got their fair share of, with hindsight, were harmful in injectable products. And so, if you can put your mind back to the end of 2021, there was still in most circles this belief that the jabs were going to stop infection and stop transmission. And if everybody just got jabbed, would all be better. Well, now, almost 2 years later, we look back on that and we go, boy, you're lucky. You're lucky that you didn't get all of the many jabs that you felt you deserved. But they have not awakened to the reality that the injections were really biological weapons. And they should be thankful that the greedy, wealthy nations bought up 10 times what they needed. But they haven't come to that awareness. So these entire negotiations are based on a false premise that is not about health, clearly. It's a trade dispute. It really should be being negotiated by the World Trade Organization, because what they're arguing about is equity and the equitable distribution of what they call pandemic response products or medical countermeasures, which is really it's a biological weapons term. And so what they're arguing about is setting up a global logistics network to distribute these poisonous jabs in the future. They're not questioning, well, wait a minute, those things didn't work. They caused harm. They don't fit the description of a vaccine. They're actually biological weapons that are genetic therapies that are contaminated and are causing harm around the world. They're completely ignoring that. What they're trying to do is divert $30 billion a year and set up a centralized command and control structure where the latest version, 20% of all of the production would be given to the WHO, and the WHO would then distribute these biological weapons to the nations who, maybe are not able to afford them or manufacture them. Now, if you just step back and you look at what they're actually doing, they're arguing about intellectual property. They're arguing about what they call a pathogen access and benefit sharing system. And they're arguing about a logistics network to have centralized command and control with the WHO to say, well, you get a jab and you get a jab and you get a jab, because they feel it wasn't distributed evenly. Well, they're correct. It was not distributed evenly, and they should count their lucky stars. But they're still of the mindset that these drugs and jabs and protocols that were set by the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex are things that they want. And until they wake up to the fact that it's the pharmaceutical industry that's causing the problem, we're going to be having a lot of people be very confused with these negotiations, because the goal is to have equitable distribution of products that should be wiped off the face of the planet. But they think of them as global public goods.
Right.
It's amazingly insane, but that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's like backwards. They're trying to get something in and distribute it, but the problem is that they believe it's good.
Right.
It's a good thing, and it's not. So I suppose what I'm most concerned about would be if there's anything binding in the direction of being mandatory to take these drugs or whatever. Is there anything on the horizon?
So this is where, again, because there are so many multiple different documents, and some of the documents are currently in a state of flux, they're being renegotiated. Since you titled this get together and we're talking about this, what everyone calls a treaty, but it's really a convention, this is where the soap opera comes in, okay? Because the documents are meant to be legally binding, but they put this caveat in there that said, well, they want to have legally binding documents that have both legally binding aspects and other aspects that are recommendations. Now, to address your core question head on and answer what I think you're asking me, back in September of 2022, when all of the nations put forth proposed amendments to the international health regulations, there were details in there that pointed towards changing the nature of the WHO and the international health regulations, changing the recommendation or advisory nature of that document and the WHO's recommendations within that document, and making them mandatory. And so the language that is in the original submissions for the 307 different amendments that are currently being rewritten, right? Those things raise the specter that the WHO, if they made recommendations, all the nations would, be obligated by a legally binding agreement to do whatever the WHO said. Well, it's been my personal opinion since February of 2023 that that is most likely to be kicked to the curb. Even the International Health Regulations Review Committee in February, when they published their final report, they said, wait a minute. That would change the whole nature of the relationship between the WHO and the member nations. There's supposed to be an advisory board. But what the review committee said, that I don't think anybody has ever talked about, is that they realize that would place the liability on the WHO. And I don't think they want that. Those recommendations came from Bangladesh changing or proposing to change a definition of standing or temporary recommendations, and Malaysia changing Article 42, which would make recommendations something that nations shall implement. So the combination of those two and many other statements, throughout, um, they very clearly, meaning the WHO's International Health Regulations Review Committee, said, hold on, um, the nations want to give that authority to the WHO. I don't necessarily think the WHO wants it because it would put a bullseye on their back. They would prefer to just make recommendations, and then they could blame all of the various nations and give them the responsibility for doing whatever they do legally. Now, one of the other amendments that nobody talks about, and again, please realize we changed. We were talking about one document, we were talking about the convention, but now I'm talking about amendments that are currently being rewritten, and maybe we'll get to see the rewrite at their next meeting on December 7 and 8. Okay. And so I don't, I will be surprised if those, types of things are in the rewritten version. What I'm concerned about is that people are so focused on that when they rewrite it and they do a wonderful job of propagandizing the things that they really want, people are going to look at it as a false victory. They're going to go, oh, they did away with the loss of our human dignity, fundamental freedoms and rights, and their recommendations are still going to be recommendations, but there's going to be dozens if not hundreds of things that are going to be so relatively boring that when this new version comes out, people are going to go, yay, we win. But no, they're getting what they want because they're busy building all of these many boring things, which are essentially investment in building out the industry that has been making toxic jabs and injecting them in people under the guise of health. And so it's a subtle game that they're playing. And the confusion between all these different documents and the focus on certain aspects of it, I think, have been functioning as decoys. And we need to pay attention to the entire document, which primarily is just investing in the infrastructure to do genomic testing and looking for pathogens with pandemic potential so that the industry that makes money from the next pandemic can continue to profiteer on everyone else's fear.
So it
Well,
seems that you mentioned the word decoy. So I was starting to think, well, what is the WHO trying to do? And I know it's a huge body, and you get people doing great research and work in there, and then you get other levels where they might even appear to contradict their scientific findings. But that happens in big organizations anyway.
I think Grace had a question also.
I'm sorry.
Since Carl mentioned that, in addition, I want to add to Carl's comment that we feel really that we have relinquished already the responsibility to the higher ups. Okay, so like when I say, because we have our government, so we're not even there. So what would an average person can do,
Well, the answer to what the ordinary average person can do is to realize, and this is one of the things I was going to say, so I'll bring it back to that. One of the proposed amendments, if it were to be adopted, actually came from Russia. And Russia proposed, now here's something that practically nobody is aware of. In 2005, with the international health regulations, the WHO and all of the nations agreed to create an office within each nation's government. And that's called the National IHR Focal Point. So every nation has that office. Ours is part of the Health and Human Services Department. That's when I think the WHO infiltrated everyone's government, because that office is obligated to surveil the health situation in each nation and report directly to the WHO if there's an outbreak of polio or SARS or whatever it might be, and also if there's an increase in any kind of disease or death. Russia proposed an amendment that says each nation would have to enact legislation to authorize that government office to implement all of the other aspects of the amendments. And so the problem is always going to be local. It's not that the WHO or the Director General Tedros is going to have, their WHO army, come and enforce this. It's going to be implemented by the very same people who did to us the things that they attempted to do to us over the last 4 years. It's your local city council, your school board, your mayor, your county health commissioner. If it's in Canada, it's some provincial, office or whatever it might be. It's the local people who feel that they have authority over you and your body. And until individual people stiffen their spine and say, no, 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 wait a minute. I know what my rights are. I know where your authority ends, and it ends at my body. You do not have any authority anywhere to tell me that I have to do something to my body. And the thing that each individual person can, and I think, must do, is just be very clear in your understanding of what your rights are and what the limits of government officials' authority is. Now, they like to say, oh, it's an emergency, so we can do whatever the heck we want to you. Well, that's, if you just think about what the word unalienable means, if you understand what your unalienable rights are, it means that they cannot be taken away, period. Right? And so if you allow yourself to be confused by somebody who claims to have the authority to tell you what you have to do to your body, if they coerce you, if they play some mental head game on you, and they get you and they convince you to voluntarily allow them to do something, they feel that, oh, I didn't make you do it. They messed with your head to the point where you gave in, and then they feel that they get to say, well, we didn't make you do it. They coerced you, they threatened your job, they told you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other thing. But for the people who stood up and said no, you're seeing them win their court cases. You're seeing them, be proven to be correct. You're seeing the facts that people stood up for 2, 3 years ago are being proven to be true. But the fear that they engender and the attempt to make people feel guilty. Oh, you've got to get jabbed because you don't want to get granny sick or whatever it might be. Those head games are what we have to become stronger against. The war is in your mind. And the one thing that everybody can do is strengthen your resolve to get to the facts, and most importantly, pull out the United States Constitution and do a word search for the word health. And you'll see that the federal government has no control over health. The word doesn't even appear in the Constitution. Javier Becerra, who is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, about 3 months ago, he was being interviewed. And they asked him, what would you like Americans to know about the Department of Health and Human Services? And the first thing he said was, people need to know that the federal government does not have authority over healthcare. That's an individual person's realm. And until you recognize that nobody in the federal government can tell you what to do with your body, and really, quite frankly, the same thing on a state level, you have bodily autonomy. No one can make you do anything unless you believe that they have such authority, and it's a false belief.
And I'm really strongly with your opinion with that, and your determination, because even for me, so what if World Health Organization is so big? So what if they're doing all this negotiation? I didn't sign for that. You're not negotiating for me. And so, in fact, seems like, I don't know, it seems like we need to really cut our relationship with whole World Health Organization and do our own work, really understanding. I don't want to call it as a World Health, but our own health forum, just like we have a conversation in the communities, because then because what you were saying is we go back again to what are the reasons that we have that underlying reason for our fear. Why are we fearful for such organizations, like they have an authority over us?
Mhm.
So, and
Well, whether
it's crazy.
someone is a believer in the history of man as found in the Bible, where 6,000 years or so, or whether you believe men have been on the planet for hundreds of thousands or millions of years, up until the 1940s, we all were doing pretty good without the World Health Organization. Okay, and so they've had 75 years, and things have not gotten better. Okay, um, you know the misinformation that they put out there, if it wasn't so sick, it would be entertaining. Tedros Ghebreyesus tweeted a couple of days ago that climate change is causing diabetes, cancer, and heart disease rates to go up. Now, maybe he's got a study somewhere that, put people in a study where they raised the temperature 1 degree, and wow, the rates of heart disease went up. But he's just lying. It's just a lie. And if people can't see that that's a lie, that climate change is increasing the rates of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and other diseases, how can you believe anything they say when they can be so bold as to tell a lie like that? It's astonishing that people even give them the time of day and listen to them. But yet, they have a budget of almost $4 billion, and they put out this propaganda while they're saying one of the articles in the latest document is talking about misinformation. So one of the things that I would like people to consider investigating is look at the laws that are on the books in various places about misinformation. Because what we all need to do is take those laws and apply them against the government officials who are the biggest purveyors of that misinformation. I mean, Tedros Ghebreyesus is the Director General of the World Health Organization, and he publicly tweeted that climate change is causing heart disease, diabetes, and cancer rates to increase. Okay? He should be held account for that lie. That is a lie. And if you're allowed to put that kind of misinformation out there from an official source like the WHO, do you need to know any more about what their intent is? They are the source of the infodemic that they are trying, to blame on people like us. I think they've nicknamed what I do and what I think you folks do. We give missing information, right? It's the information they don't want anybody to see, but they've given it a nickname. They call it misinformation, right? It's just the missing
I like
information.
that missing information.
Yeah, I mean,
It's true. As
they don't
Dr.
want us to. They don't want us to see it.
And Dr. McCullough and other critical thinkers would say there's no such thing as misinformation. It's all just lack of information. There's still information, but missing information. I like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Carl has more to say about this one, because we've been having conversations with those experts, real experts in climate change. So, Carl, add some more.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to. I understand what you're saying with having to look at all these amendments and what's eventually going to bubble up to the top that becomes mandatory or whatever, or that we have to listen to, or that we get threatened by. So do you see a course other than I understand when you have a big organization and they want control and distribution power in the pharmaceutical and all that. But do you see any particular veins coming to the top as to what the WHO wants to achieve, or is it achieving what it wants to right now?
Well, let me question the question, okay? Because the soap opera nature of what's going on here is it's not just that the WHO wants what the WHO wants. That's for certain. But when you realize that there's 194 member nations, 2 other nations that are party to the regulations, and there's these 400 plus relevant stakeholders, you realize that it's being tugged in many, many, many different directions. And so if you can put yourself into the shoes of any one of the cast of characters, okay? If you put yourself into the shoes of the delegate from Bangladesh, okay, you're going to see this elephant differently than if you put yourself in the shoes of one of the European nations delegations, okay? The European Union has said that all European nations must go along with what the European Commission says. So right there in Europe, each individual nation is dealing with this whole other level of bureaucracy. We've had that since our inception in the United States. Every state has authority, but yet it's the federal government that is negotiating. Well, wait a minute, the 27 nations in Europe all get a vote at the WHO. How come we don't send a delegate from each of the 50 states? Well, that's just not how it's structured. But people need to realize that every nation at the WHO gets one vote. So China and India, with 1.5 billion people, they get one vote. United States, Nigeria, Indonesia, Germany, UK, Brazil, nations with hundreds of millions of people, they get one vote. But the little tiny, island nations in the Caribbean or the South Pacific or, relatively poor nations in Africa, they all get one vote. And so at some point, what may happen is the majority of the smaller nations come together and they realize, well, wait a minute, we can come together and we can say this is what we want. And in regards to the amendments, they could tell the WHO and the working group, you guys aren't listening to us. Here's what we want. And if they get a simple majority together, they could dictate to the world what they want just through a simple majority with a substantial minority of people. Now, when you realize that, there's something deeply flawed with the World Health Organization. Now, I'm not a proponent of, China or India or the United States or, highly populated nations dominating it. But if you just look at how our federal government is structured, the Senate, each state gets same amount of votes, but more populated states like California, Texas, Florida, New York, and so forth, in the House of Representatives, they're proportionally represented. And so one of the things that I think the vast majority of people in America are unaware of is that argument within these negotiations between the negotiations were started because the poorer nations said, hey, you're not giving us enough of these jabs. And the wealthy nations were in control. And the argument that's going on right now is that the poorer nations have been submitting their proposals, but the WHO and the bureaucracy is actually under the control of the European Union and the United States and other nations. And so even though these nations are submitting what they want, it's not getting into the documents. And so this soap opera nature of what's going on is really interesting because they are having a difficult time reaching agreement. Back in, well, it's already November. So actually a month ago today, October 2nd, at the working group for the amendments meeting, the co-chair, Dr. Abdullah Asiri from Saudi Arabia started off the meeting by saying, you know what, we just have to report, we don't think we're going to meet our deadline because they're not reaching agreement. And so I'm very optimistic that the negotiations are having a difficult time, because it's not just that the WHO wants what they want. Obviously, they do. And they're guiding this process, they're controlling this process, and they're rewriting what the many nations say they want to serve their masters, because their masters are the ones who give them money. And so, I encourage people to tune in, because it is literally a soap opera. There's hundreds of characters that are participating. They all want what they want. The United States and the European Union and whoever donates money is really who's controlling the process. And what the poor nations want is access to intellectual property that the pharmaceutical companies do not want to give them. And so it's a battle royale. And I think it's not going well for any of the parties. And I'm hopeful that the world wakes up in time to realize that pharmacy and jabs are killing people. Why are they trying to negotiate building out the industry to make more of that and giving it billions of dollars that are outside of our control? That bigger issue is not being discussed. They're not talking about the whole nature of these negotiations being deeply flawed, because they're just trying to finance this murderous industry that I oppose with every fiber of my being.
Do you think that something like another pandemic or some global catastrophe would accelerate everybody in the negotiations, are biased in the way so they could get things done?
I try not to get into go onto speculation island. Okay. I think they're having problems, rightfully so, because the premise of what they're discussing is completely and deeply flawed. They're arguing over how to distribute biological weapons. And until somebody walks into the room and says, what are you people doing here? Don't you know that these jabs and these drugs are killing people? Why are you trying to fund more of that industrial sector to do the fake testing and the genomic sequencing and the manufacturing of drugs and jabs that damage people's immune systems? What are you doing? You're out of your mind. This is the wrong discussion. And if you insist on continuing this discussion, we need to dissolve your entire organization, because that has nothing to do with health. Quite frankly, that's murder. And some people refer to the WHO as the World Holocaust Organization or the World Homicide Organization. They're negotiating what is essentially a biological weapons treaty. They want to facilitate going around the world, looking everywhere they possibly can to find new pathogens with pandemic potential, sequence their genomes, bring them into a laboratory, and make drugs and jabs to treat problems that maybe only have the potential, if that dual use research of concern goes bad and somebody turns these new pathogens into a biological weapon, then you'll have the medical countermeasure to protect people from it. What we need is, to dissolve that industry, but they're trying to build it out by an order of magnitude. And until people see what's really going on, but the people who are negotiating, in these rooms, all they see are dollar signs. All they see is, well, they're going to be divvying up a whole bunch of money, and so we need to get our piece of the pie and have that industry built in our nation, so our people get good jobs and we can control our own future. To do what? To poison more people? I mean, the insanity is beyond belief.
Yeah, I got it. It's flawed right from the from what they're peddling, and yeah. So there's nothing. It just seems like a big boondoggle where everybody gets together and tries to get a bit of funding,
Yeah,
and tries to make something worth and employ themselves. But it's a huge logistics.
The latest document that's in the title of our meeting here, the negotiating text of the now they call it pandemic agreement. I encourage people to read chapter 3, because chapter 3 talks about setting up a new bureaucracy, the Conference of the Parties, and giving them the authority to write protocols at yearly meetings. They could meet more often if they wanted to, but they want to throw billions of dollars at this so that they write the protocols. And the parallel, the analogy, the similarities between the Framework Convention for Climate Change that was adopted by the UN in 1992, if you think that's working out great, having a conference of the parties meet every year to come up with crazy ideas to force upon the population, if you think that's working out great for climate change, then you might be for doing that for pandemic prevention. But they're negotiating a system that would go out into the world to seek out new pathogens with pandemic potential, bring them into a WHO-led laboratory network, exchange intellectual property so that if a nation found a pathogen, they would give access to that pathogen physically and or just the purported genomic sequence of it in return for benefits. And then the WHO would insist that any manufacturers would give 20% of whatever they produce to then be distributed to the nations as a benefit because they shared the information about this newfound pathogen with pandemic potential. That's not how you would stop the next pandemic. That's how you would create it. And so what they're really doing is negotiating a pandemic creation business model. And even the health minister at the the B20 in 2022, the business meeting that was held in Bali, he was talking about just a small subset of this, the pandemic fund that is organized by the World Bank and mostly funded by United States Defense Department. They put forth $1 billion through the National Defense Authorization Act to fund this World Bank pandemic fund. And when it was announced, the Indonesian health minister said to all the business leaders in Bali, they've got billions of dollars for this pandemic industry. Go invest. This is a great business opportunity. So if you're, making equipment for laboratories and testing and genomic sequencing and, pharmaceutical companies to make jabs or manufacturing plants to manufacture them, that's a growth industry because they want to grow it. And once people realize that, everybody goes, well, that's crazy, right? So I put together the People's Declaration. So if you go to thepeoplesdeclaration.com, and it's just an article on my Substack, it essentially says it's what they're not negotiating that needs to be negotiated. We need to have a treaty to end gain-of-function research. We need to stop these mRNA jabs. They're poison. And they're trying to build out the very thing. They're going in exactly the opposite direction of where any, well-informed, sane person would say makes sense. Because the lessons that they've learned are that, hey, we made a lot of money doing this. We just missed a certain segment of the population because they didn't have the infrastructure in Africa or, the West Indies or the Caribbean or wherever. They want to build out the industry that they've used to abuse people for the last 4 years.
So I'll jump in. First of all, I'll apologize because we didn't realize the times changed. So we usually do at 6. So nice to meet you, James.
Nice to meet you too, right?
And basically, if there's any question that I have asked that's been addressed, I want to respect the listeners as well, that you can just tell me that you've covered it already. So I just would like to know off the bat, like with the different countries, is there any that are against the World Health Organization?
We'll get to see if any nations have the guts to push back, because one of the things that we haven't talked about, and so I'll talk about it now since you raised that question, is last year in 2022, amendments to the international health regulations were adopted. And most people are just completely unaware of this. Nobody, and if there's an exception and the person reaches out to me, please forgive me for not being aware of it. Andrew Bridgen has spoken a little bit around this topic, but to my knowledge, not a single member of the media, not a single member of any government, any parliament, any Congress, any Senate, anywhere has spoken out in opposition to the amendments that were adopted on May 27th, 2022. To give you some background on that, but to answer your question directly first, the deadline to reject those amendments is December 1st. And so on December 2nd, we will see if any nations have the guts to say, well, wait a minute, we reject those amendments, because the process is not what people think it is. The process is such that when they amend the international health regulations at their World Health Assembly, it is assumed that all of the nations are fine with that, unless the head of state of any of those nations just writes a letter to the WHO and says, we reject those amendments for our nation. There's an 18-month period to do that. We've already wasted 17 months and nobody has said a word, okay? And if they go until December 1st and they don't simply write a letter, it's too late. You missed your chance. It's kind of like if you buy something at a store and you have a 30-day return policy, you come back 2 months later, they say, hey, you're too late. And so in September at the United Nations, there were a number of political declarations that they had proposed at the UN. And on the last day, on Sunday the 17th, before all these meetings were to begin, 17th of September, 11 nations sent such a letter to the United Nations, and they said, nope, we don't agree. And so I'm hopeful that those same 11 nations, and I've heard rumblings from some other nations, we shall see, all they have to do is write a letter to the WHO. And I already wrote such a letter. People can go to rejecttheamendments.com and send a letter. It's already pre-written. You just got to print it out, sign it, and mail it to your member of Congress, to your senators, to the President Biden, and to Tedros, and say, I reject these amendments. Now, what Biden was trying to do was to shorten the time period by which this next round of amendments would be implemented. There's a 24-month period between adoption and it becoming legally binding. He wanted to shorten that down to 6 months. And so there's hundreds of changes being made. And last year, he tried to get them to shorten it down to 6 months. Now, that amendment isn't going to change anyone's life. It isn't going to save any life. It isn't going to improve anybody's health. They were trying to set the stage to ram through the next batch of amendments. And 6 months from next May would be December 1st of next year, 2025. I'm sorry, 2024. And so Biden would still be in office. So he wanted to try to change the rules so that he would still be in office. He could run out the clock and it would just be too late. And so that didn't go well for him. And last year, that got negotiated out to 10 months to be rejected and 12 months to go into effect. But it drives home the point that none of these amendments came back to the Senate to be discussed. Nobody asked the Senate for their advice and consent, and nobody is going to. the entire structure of how this operates, it was created in 1969, and the meeting that did that was at the very same time that supposedly men were landing on the moon. So 54 years ago, they created a structure where they said, oh, if these unelected, unaccountable, unknown bureaucrats get together and have a meeting and decide to change international law, the House and the Senate and parliaments around the world, you guys don't have anything to say about it. Now, if you're okay with that, then you have to accept that we lost our representative democracy back in 1969 when Richard Nixon was the president. And in 54 years, maybe I'm the first person to say, wait a minute, that's the problem. The international health regulations that were adopted in 1969 that took away any authority from any legislative body and the people, that needs to be eliminated. That is the cause of the problem. You can't just change the rules without the consent of the people. But that's the situation we've been living under for 54 years.
And I mean, I personally don't believe in voting because I've never seen any politician or president of any country doing anything that benefits. So I believe that if you actually vote for him, you're actually saying, hey, I'm giving you my power. Have you looked at kind of the sovereignty UCC aspect of this? Because even during the pandemic, when they were pushing all this, like with a mandate, you have to actually, if you go by Black Law's dictionary, you have to say, show me my signature for this. So you can stand in your own. And like the reason I say this is because I've got like courts to back off, I've got bailiffs to back off, I've got detectives to back off. I've realized that this is all trickery, and that even all the countries, they're corporations, and like, yeah, they're pushing this thing, and we think, okay, we have to accept it. But have you or anybody that you see that's fighting this kind of gone down that route?
Because of the time change, you missed a portion of what I was saying. Just on the surface from what you've said, I probably could not agree with you more, right? I'm aware of the types of things that you're talking about. And one of the pieces of the discussions that we had earlier was that individual people have to understand how to stand in their own authority and defend their own unalienable rights. You mentioned a couple of things that I didn't mention, which is a lot of times people try to argue constitutional rights when they're actually engaged in commercial activity. And so the average person has never been properly educated and is unaware, and they end up arguing the wrong arguments, finding themselves in a court that has no jurisdiction over them, using the wrong language, and they wonder why it's so frustrating. By all means, talk about what it sounds like you've been working on. I very much agree that individual people, when their rights and freedoms are infringed upon, or they forget that they're dealing with commercial code and it's just a negotiation. And when you realize that if someone is using very coercive language and they're making you an offer, well, you can refuse it and you can throw that back upon them. And the ideas that you're talking about is an education that everybody on the planet needs to get, because we don't get that education in school.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for those that might know much about it, usually when they're sending people the letters, they don't sign it, or it's a digital. So you have to say, I want a wetting signature by a person, and they won't do that. So you kind of get away. And then also ask them, show to me that you can prove you've the rights over me. They can't do that either. And as long as everybody done that, then they'd all disappear overnight.
Right. And it's an educational task that, by all means, after we have this meeting, let's get together and join forces, moving forward, because we see these large organizations, and ultimately what they do is they delegate their dirty work to people all around the world who are our friends and neighbors. I mentioned earlier, school boards and city councils and county commissioners and provincial, overlords, whatever their title may be. And those people have a certain sense of authority that is beyond their legal authority. And so they get all of these little minions to do their dirty work. And it's only going to stop when individual people realize that they need to know how to protect themselves from a local neighbor, friend, family member, local school board member, whatever it might be. When you have the knowledge that Roy you're talking about, you realize that they disappear, because once you turn that liability back on them, and they realize that more than they do about how to stop them from doing the things that they think they're able to do, they disappear like cockroaches. When you walk into a room and turn the light on, boom, they're gone, right? So there have been many quote unquote officials who have just chosen to resign because they realize that they're in the wrong place doing the wrong thing, and people are starting to wise up. And then you bring the challenge directly to them when they're faced with losing their financial world personally because they don't have authority, and they can be held accountable on a personal basis. I think that might be some of the things that you're talking about. I'm sure you could talk more about it, ongoing. They realize how wrong they are and how vulnerable they are. And the power actually really is with the people, but only if we know enough to win the game, because it is a head game. And if you believe what they say, you're going to lose. But if you understand that what they say is misguided, it's it's misinformation, it's lies, and a lot of bluff and bluster, where they make it sound like you have to, and until you learn enough to know that you don't have to, they're going to win the battle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of like psychological as well, because what happens is there's a lot of people that are having in-house fighting, and they're just regurgitating the hatred that they have for what's going on. Like even this, they're signing this, they're doing that, instead of just putting their head down and realizing, what can I do that can actually make a difference to this? And it's as simple as that. And when you know your own power, this is how we'll stop it all. So I'm not sure what you've also covered, but I mean, has the World Health Organization ever done anything of benefit?
Well, that's a trick question, and so the answer is yes. Okay, and that's part of how propaganda works. They certainly show you this wonderful picture of all of the many things, and there are good people. They almost got grace, to sign up, right? And so there's good people who get involved in these organizations with the intent of doing good work. Okay, but ultimately, is it good work to be so blindly focused on injecting everybody on the planet, not just for COVID, but for everything else under the sun? Is it maybe better work to, work with nature and realize that the injections that they're giving people are actually customer acquisition tools? I've been in natural health long enough to realize that the testing, the drugs, the treatments and the therapies, and certainly the injections don't improve people's health. They take healthy people, trick them into applying these methods, which are essentially poisons, so that they become lifelong customers. It's astonishing to me, however many people it may be, who have gotten 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 jabs, and now they're having health issues that most people would argue are due to the jabs deranging their immune system. And say they go back to the very same system that inflicted that harm upon them, trying to get treatment for cancer or myocarditis or stroke or whatever it might be. And it's going to your enemy who's trying to kill you because you believe they're trying to heal you. Now, there's good people involved in all of this, and they're confused. But once they wake up, they're faced with a loss of their entire life's work. When people wake up, I just published an article about a friend of mine, Robert Yoho. He's a doctor who lives local to me.
He was on my show, Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. When you wake up to the fact that this whole system is broken. Okay. But your life is invested in that. That is a trauma that, so many people still need to go through. They still need to wake up and go, well, wait a minute. You're trying to kill me. I'm going to you to make me healthier, and you're prescribing poison, both in oral and injectable form. What am I doing here? I need to leave. I need to find somebody else. Well, that's blasphemy until you realize that it's truth. And if you think that your medical doctors and the system is there to do anything other than profit from your illness, I have a very simple question for people. Who do you know that profits when you are healthy, other than yourself and maybe your family, right? If your doctors or practitioners, if they profit by doing things to you when you're sick, and some of those things that they do make you sicker, when are you going to wake up to the reality that you've been scammed? It's an enormous scam. It's probably 5 times the size of the military industrial complex. It's enormous in the Western developed world, and they realize that they have not made the inroads into the relatively poorer nations. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get public money to build out their industry in nations that can't afford their poison, because they don't want to just poison you. They want to profit from the poisoning. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But so many people are just absolutely blind to it. The job that we have, you mentioned, waking up people to the law and the different aspects of how law is designed to work against you unless you understand how to make it work for you. Same thing with health and medicine. The system is designed. I don't think they want to kill you. That makes money for the undertaker and the funeral director. They want to just take all of your money away and keep you in a state of subservience to them, dependent on them to go get prescriptions for more poison and more biological weapon jabs. This is an opportunity for the world to wake up to the fact that that system is deeply, deeply flawed, and we need to walk away from it and go back to more natural, healthy, real ideas about what it means to be human and what it means to be healthy. And health is not found in a pharmacy. It just isn't.
I think the problem is a lot of people definitely in the last few years have kind of realized they've been hoodwinked, but we have to kind of massage the ego, because the problem is now that they know it, a lot of people, and I'm talking about a high percentage of people, are embarrassed to go, I was actually wrong. I mean, even in my research and anything I do, if I find out something that is different to my previous beliefs, I go, okay, I can change, because that's what I was fed. But unfortunately, a lot of people can't do that. And we have to try to find how to navigate that to make them, hey, there's nothing wrong with you having that belief system previously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, if someone points out an error in anything that I've done, you get to be one of my best buddies. Like, keep telling me how I'm wrong. By all means, please do. Makes you a better person. And the stifling of that dynamic, okay, where someone who has an awareness of something that causes someone else to have to change their awareness, when that is stifled, that is, probably the root of all kinds of trouble through history. But the truth always wins, because it's endless. It doesn't change. When you hear someone, and you may have missed this earlier, Tedros Ghebreyesus, who is the Director General of the World Health Organization, tweeted the other day that due to climate change, rates of heart disease and cancer and diabetes are rising. And you just go, how could anybody say such a blatantly obvious lie and be allowed to continue in his position? That's, the Director General of the World Health Organization blames increases in ailments that are very, strongly argued being caused by the jabs. The elevations in heart problems and diabetes and immune dysfunction and cancer around the world are being caused by these pharmaceutical interventions. And he's blaming climate change. Okay. That's criminal. That's beyond, I mean, talk about disinformation. And so if people could just latch on to that and bring him down for being such a blatant liar, but yet people just look the other way.
Well, I think what I've seen is in the last few years, is now there's a lot more that are not accepting this. So you can be sure if he has tweeted that, that's the first I've heard of it, but you can be sure if you actually look at the thread, there will be a lot of people abusing him because of that. And that in turn then will get a lot of momentum. So I think people think they can do nothing. But when you see somebody posting something like that, don't just accept it. Attack. As in not in a negative, but just say, hey, call bullshit when it's bullshit.
I mean, we might as well start a lie, that the jabs are causing climate change. I mean, if you can make up stories, you might as well make up good ones. And, that's one of the things they do. They tell lies that are so ridiculous that people are frozen and they go, oh, I can't believe you said that. But then they just keep moving on. And so, across the board, we all have to speak our truth as we understand it to be. And be willing to suffer the slings and arrows. If I say something that's wrong, I'll fess up to it in a heartbeat. But you want to get at the truth. I don't have to be right, but I want everyone to work towards what is right and true. And along the way, we'll make some mistakes. We'll get a few things wrong. Okay, fine, if you're willing to admit it. But when you are in power and you are coercing and forcing people based on information that is blatantly, immediately known to be a lie, you cannot be allowed to keep your position.
And I hope maybe you've discussed this as well, but it's a conflict of interest that you've got Gates, Gavi making, invested in making the jabs and then involved with the World Health Organization as well. I mean, how is that? If you just look at that alone,
right,
that's corruption at its highest.
Right. No, the problems go deep, and one of the things that we all need to do is to realize that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of healing modalities that various people around the world practice. That I haven't been to a medical doctor since I was 19 years old. You don't need to go to the pharmacy and give money to the pharmaceutical industry. Now, there are some things like, bioidentical hormones, insulin, progesterone, things like that. Science can produce some amazingly beneficial and wonderful things to help people. Okay. But the vast majority of it, if you just look at it and you go, well, here are all of the effects that this poison causes. We've allowed people to be convinced that swallowing a poison that causes all kinds of dis-ease is somehow the path from one disease towards health. Injecting unknown substances. I live in the Los Angeles area, and maybe this is a bad scenario to bring to mind, but there's a very rough part of town called Skid Row. And, a lot of homelessness, crime, drugs, and so forth. I honestly think people would be safer in the long run if they went down to Skid Row in the middle of the night, rolled up their shirt sleeve, and asked any random stranger to inject some unknown substance into their arm. I think you'd be better off doing that than going to the local pharmacy and having them inject you with an unknown substance that could potentially change the genetic makeup of your children if it would allow you to have children. Okay, the harm and damage that is being caused by the medical establishment is worse than what goes on at Skid Row, but people don't see it that way. And we honor, I mean, we spend trillions of dollars into that industry, honoring it while it's killing people. And, you know, how you get people to wake up to that, I think you start with identifying people who are already awake. If you've ever watched the movie The Matrix, um, you don't have to give people a red pill. You can just ask anyone, what was the first red pill moment for you? And if they scratch their head going, I don't know what you're talking about, okay, just tell them to go watch the movie. Because if they don't even know and can't even grasp the concept that maybe some of the things you've been taught your whole life were lies, okay, pick whatever topic you want in history, and what you think you know about it is probably wrong. If you've never had a red pill moment, okay, um, you might want to talk to somebody else and start to organize people who, you know, maybe they woke up with some ancient history that was a lie, or something from, you know, the world wars, or from, you know, our current life situation. If somebody replies, oh yeah, when I learned about that, I realized I was being lied to, then you have somebody who's capable of taking in new information and going, oh yeah, you know, I woke up a little bit. Then that type of person is likely to be able to wake up a little bit more. And my suggestion to people is, you know, give information to everyone. But if you just ask a simple question, what was your first red pill moment? If the person looks at you like they have no idea what in the world you're talking about, give them all the love in the world and share some information with them. Maybe you will give them their first red pill moment. Okay. Ask them a whole bunch of questions about what they believe. Um, they're just drinking the Kool-Aid, and they deserve our love. They deserve our help, but they're also going to suck a lot of energy out of you. And if you have it to give, by all means, give it. But I think it's better to identify people who are already awake and organize them. Because if you showed up at that same person's door with 10 friends to have a conversation about a given topic, um, that volume of support for the truth might have a better impact than if you're just going to sit there and argue with somebody who doesn't want to hear what you have to say. So, you know, organizing and getting people together, and then focusing on what it is you want to do, whether it's the WHO or central bank digital currency, or, you know, finances or law, or, you know, the military industrial complex. Get better connected to people who want something similar to what you want, and work towards creating it off into the future, because we have to know what we want, not just what we don't want.
Excellent. And just finally, before I pass it to Grace, like with the activism against the World Health Organization, because I know, unfortunately, they infiltrate a lot of things and they make it look like, hey, we're helping you, but it's really them. How can people know which ones are the right ones that will actually make some difference?
Well, the only way anybody ever knows anything is to look inside your own heart and do what feels right for you. Um, in terms of the WHO, I honestly think that they're having difficulty. They're postponing some of their deadlines. You know, there's dissent amongst everything. Job number one is to just know as much as you can about what's going on, and so um, spreading inaccurate information. I can't tell you how many people have sent me how many different videos, and they ask me, is this true? Is this true? And so a lot of the um, alternative media is putting out inaccurate information. And so it is difficult to know. And so with any article that you read on any topic known to mankind, look through the article and see if you can find the actual source. It's been getting more and more difficult. You read articles on anything, and the journalist, if you want to call them that, will say something like, "Oh, sources have revealed," right? And it's like, well, one of the things I've been trying to do is just publish the actual documents. You know, I mean, It's a 30-page document. This is the latest version of their negotiating agreement. If you read the first chapter of it, sounds all lovely and wonderful. Okay. If you read chapter 2, your head's going to hurt. They're like, why are they trying to make more pandemics? And then you read chapter 3 and you realize what they really want is to set up a bureaucracy that makes decisions for you off into the future forever and give them tons of money. Don't take my word for it. Don't listen to anybody. Read the damn document. See for yourself what it says. Go to the source always. And on a higher level, go to source. Go to your belief in a creator and find out what's right for you. And whatever it is that you hear inside yourself that is right for you, trust that. It's the only way.
Excellent. Thank you very much, James. Pass you back to Grace.
And back to Tedros, what would you say with his last comment saying the world must never be the same? Like, what does he really means by, the world or same? What's wrong with the world or who's going to make it? Because they use this tagline and they repeat it and media repeats it.
Yep. It's been pointed out to me that I have more than a 4-head. I have maybe like a 5 or a 6-head. And the frontal lobe is supposedly where you exercise your power of discernment. And so if you watch anything in the media and you go, oh, that's clearly a demonstrable fact. Okay. I've experienced it. I've worked in that field, and the thing that person is saying, I agree with because I know that it's true. Versus somebody spewing propaganda. Okay. Until people actually engage with the information that's coming in, and they use that part of our mind that gets to go, that's bullshit, and that's bullshit, and that's bullshit, and that's bullshit. Why am I even listening to that? Get that out of my mind. They're lying. Well, when you hear somebody lie, you go, oh, well, they lied, obviously. What else are they saying? And you put it through that filter of, well, they've lied before. Are they going to lie again? Is everything they're telling me a lie? Or, oh, well, wait a minute. Maybe they mix a certain amount of truth in there. You have to be able to pick out, this is true, and this is true, and that's true, and that's confused. And maybe they mean well, but they're confused. We have to teach that to people. And I don't think that's being taught in schools. The idea that you can question, I won't bore you with the details, but I had an episode in my own life when I was in 5th grade, and my teacher said something to the class that was wrong, but they believed it to be true. It didn't make them a bad teacher, just made them wrong on that particular issue. And so in 5th grade, I think it was the first time I realized that I can't just let everything come in, because my teachers, my mentors might be teaching me wrong things. And then when you go back and you look at your history books and you look at everything else, you go, oh my God, it was all wrong. Okay, what the heck is going on here? You learn about the law, you learn about health. You go, oh my goodness, so much of this is wrong. If you're not willing to question it, you're doomed.
And here's one question from the audience. You said, how's Biden's administration tied to the World Health Organization?
How is the Biden administration tied to the World Health Organization? Well, in many ways. We sent 64 people in our delegation. I think I may have frozen up here. Can you folks still hear me?
We could still hear you, though.
Okay. Well, maybe my video is just frozen for me. They were the administration that first put forth the amendments to the international health regulations back on January 18th, 2022. They, I believe, were trying and continue to try to use the WHO to control aspects of what's going on in the world. I would encourage people to look into the United States Defense Department's global health security agenda. I, this is going to be maybe a little bit of an overstatement on my part, so I'll scale it back down a little bit. I think the United States has created dozens, if not hundreds, of biological weapons research labs around the world, and we're the biggest problem. There were 36 biolabs in the Ukraine, and I reported on that back in February of 2022. And people are now just beginning to notice. Biological warfare is something that needs to be stopped, and most people aren't even, aware of the fact that that's really what we're dealing with. The pharmaceutical industry has been co-opted by the Defense Department to wage war on humanity. And while that might be seen by some as an overstatement, if it opens up your mind to everything going on is not what you think it is, then it'll be a good thing for you to investigate.
And follow-up comment is, didn't Trump want to defund the World Health Organization?
Trump took that money and gave it to Gavi instead, which is a vaccine alliance. And to my knowledge, at this point, still has not said a word in opposition to the jabs that were created essentially by the Defense Department. Even Alex Azar, who's the Secretary of Health and Human Services, said, "Oh no, the Health and Human Services Department were not in charge of Warp Speed. That was the Defense Department's job." And so one of the things that I've come to realize is that I'm more focused on trying to enlighten and organize people. And politicians are politicians, regardless of what party they may be in. We need to strengthen and organize people so that whoever is put in those positions of office realize that they work for us. And until that is reinvigorated, it doesn't matter who's in office. If they think that they get to do whatever they want to do, that's not how it's supposed to work. Our public servants are supposed to serve the will of the people, not the other way around.
We could still hear you, James, but if you want to quickly adjust your camera, maybe Roy suggesting to turn it on and off, you're still frozen to us. And while you do that, I just want to make I want to acknowledge the conversation that our viewers, Arthur and John, thank you for being part of our conversation. Okay, and you see, I encourage comments and conversation from the audience, and you go ahead and do that, because after this, other people can also read your comments, because sometimes we cannot accommodate all of you to be with us. But anyway, I'm sure James is coming back, and please don't forget, Roy is from the Awakening podcast, and he has a number of podcasts as well. Roy, do you want to just quickly tell them so where they can get you? Because you and I and Carl, we've been doing this for many years.
Yeah, so I've got a speaking podcast, a meditation to help people chill in these stressful times, crypto podcast, and for all the Poles that moved abroad, a lot of them met partners. Some people are trying to learn Polish, so I've got a Polish podcast as well, and you'll find everything on bio.link/podcaster.
Yeah, and we do try our best to put it up in so many other platforms. All right. So today, for the first time, I'm streaming in Odyssey, and let's just see what happens. I'm all about exploring to help truth be known or spread the truth. And of course, our dear friend Carl he's also the author of a book called Nature's Twist. So, try that and look at that. It's a good read. And just like you read a World Health Organization, you have to pay attention and read really thoroughly and stop now and then. But that's how I look at the World Health Organization manifesto. That's why I said it's boring, because it could make you sleep. I know you were scared, or there's so many. It challenges your brain. But so we're gonna wait for James, okay, because he didn't really say goodbye yet. However, earlier when we started, Roy, he changed his before we officially went on live. He changed his computer, because he said, let me change my computer. So mine, you could follow me at Quantum Nurse Grace Asagra. So I do have a good online presence. You press my name, you find it. If you press Quantum Nurse, you find it. And as I said earlier, I try to update so that you could continue to be connected with us. And while we're waiting, maybe we could the three of us can share our maybe like the very first time that we think this world is crazy, when they declared it. Because for me, it's really like when my friend who's also a nurse said, hey, it's officially a pandemic, and said World Health declared it. And I just look at her like, and so like right away it's like, so then the second feeling I had is, I'm not scared, because I know what I can do for my body. So basically, as our guest James was saying, if you know how to take care of your body, how your body operates to be healthy, then I think we can open up our mind and not be too scared, or okay. So how about you, Carl, Roy? What's the very first feeling you had?
I think it started when I was born, but I suppose at a young age, I knew there was something amiss. I think maybe I was about 10 or 11 when I noticed there was a bunch of strikes in town. There was a garbage strike, there was a milk strike, there was an electricity strike, and maybe even a bank strike. That was in the 70s in Ireland. And I said, they're all working together for a bigger impact. And sorry, my light just went off there or something. But how deep did it go is something that's ongoing. And it seems to get deeper and deeper. And it seems to be everywhere. And it all seems to stem from, I suppose, from the way individuals carry themselves into the collective. But I'm going off into a philosophical thing here. Yeah, probably when I was about 10 or 11. But then the year 2000, that's when things got much more serious, and I began to probe deeper. Roy, what about you?
I think it was definitely when I was younger, when they were pushing religion down your throat. And even individuals that were kind of pretending they were religious, and you'd see they were the ones that were the thieves, or they were having the affairs. And then when you saw the abuse that was going on, because even at a young age, we could see that it was abuse, and they'd move the abusing priest to a different parish, and you were like, what's going on here? And then later on the medical side of things, because I could see a lot of stuff going on with that. And ever since then, it's just like layer by layer. At one stage, I actually thought the government did your best part, because like with the Celtic Tiger, I thought, things are getting better. These are looking after us. And then you realize why they were getting better. So no, I question everything. And I even look back and I look at the education system, and I see that, they were making us put our finger up to our mouth, fold our arms, and just kind of sit there. And even just talking to like friends recently, like he was saying he was tied to a chair at a young age, like 7 or 6 or something like that, and they gagged his mouth. Like, we just accepted that. Whereas if they'd done that to your children today, you would go in and knock them out. But like, I think you have to just start reflecting on your life as you go along. And then you might kind of wake up a little bit and go, hey, was this normal? Or was I being conditioned to work in a corporation to be a slave all my life? And then you kind of look at the taxing system and realize, is this kind of voluntary or do I have a choice? And homelessness, like that's something that I'm constantly looking at. It's like, yeah, they've all these organizations trying to help the homeless, but who's making them homeless? Who's actually depressing them that they're charging them for, like even now, all the electricity, all the gas, all the bills that people can't afford. They get depressed, they just go on drugs, they go on alcohol, they can't pay their bills and they're kicked out. And they're saying, oh, they didn't get it, they were on drugs or something like that. But the whole lot is orchestrated. And if you give people dignity and just help, everything could be resolved. And it's all orchestrated from the top.
Yeah, so definitely, I'm sure each and every one of our viewers and even those who haven't even known that we're doing this have their own moments of awakening, and we just have to continue to do our own work. And thank you again. So I just got in touch with James. He said his internet just went bunkered. So I, that happens too, and that's why all of us should just pick it up from wherever. But the bottom line from what this conversation is, and Roy and James emphasized it, that it's really knowing what's really like knowing about our own sovereignty, right? Roy, you said that that's important. Knowing that and knowing what we have, because it feels so doomed, it looks doomed, but we could really say no. So sometimes when people post something for me and say this is their plan, I said no, that's their plan, but that's not my plan, or I'm not going to be in that plan. So you always, and the power of words, you say I choose. That I like what was that Arthur? Anyway, yeah, you said like, that he's envisioning something different from what the singularity of World Health wants us to be under one control, one health, or whatever they call it. But he's envisioning it that the plan will not, there won't be part of the of his vision. Okay, so yeah.
So just finally, Grace, because like what I'm actually giving me hope is like, because we've had BB Backus, who I find fantastic. And I've actually had her on myself recently, and we've had like Peter Stone, Peter Wilson talking about either common law or sovereignty. But when she was on my show recently, she was like saying that, all the land is owned by the UK, which I believe it is. And she was even giving me documentation showing that the Queen had given Prince William Canada. And recently DeSantis, because of the wokeism and all this kind of pushing agenda with Disney, DeSantis was trying to actually say, hey, you're not getting away with all these grants and everything. And the documentation that I've seen coming through is the land is owned by the Crown. So they're escaping it from that. So just when you see little things connecting up, you go, people will say something. So when she said that, I'm sure loads of people said, oh, she's nuts. That can't be right. But when you see something like that, them escaping their tax and they're saying, hey, our land is owned by the Crown, then maybe you can start putting two and two together. So just don't accept anything, question everything.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, let me put the information for James, okay? And that's his phone number, and that's his Skype. And I have this also posted because he wants you to get it, anyone who wants to get in touch with him, okay? And so feel free. Don't forget, we only continue because you're also involved with us, and you can continue to reach out to any of us, Roy, Grace, and Carl, and have a good one. Take it easy. It will be in BitChute, Rumble, because earlier someone texted me, Roy said, hey, are you doing it in Facebook? Because sometimes something is off. Rumble is also acting up. So I said, yeah, let me. So it's Rumble, and I'm playing with Odyssey and Twitter, and also in LinkedIn. LinkedIn is also kind of funny, but anyway. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, James. Sorry you couldn't come back right now, but be back next time. And Roy, maybe we could have BB Backus back, because that's crucial. That's UCC. Take care.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, and share with your friends. And you'll find all my shows with the QR code or bio.link/podcaster, as well as my podcast coaching. And I'd like to thank my sponsor, DanielPacker.com, helping people with anxiety, stress, and addictions. He's got a 90% success rate, and you only pay if you're successful. Also, if you'd like to go on a podcasting tour, I can help you do that. And if you're interested in sponsorship, you can contact me on my bio.link/podcaster. Until next week, take care.